Okay, so bearings are here. I'm going to go ahead and start throwing this thing together. I've already measured everything. It's right at the top end of tolerance for OEM, but I'm going to run it. So probably going to end up running a little bit heavier oil anyway. I'll probably be running Brad Penn 2050. Yeah, so anyway, getting after it. I'm going to attempt to see if this assembly lube will hold these thrust bearings on enough to get the crank started in there. That center main cap kind of doesn't really align itself anyway. It doesn't have dowel pins or anything. So I'm going to do that one first, at least snug it up first. And I'm going to kind of tap the crank back and forth to make sure that the center cap is centered. Being careful not to get any lube between the caps on the seating surface there. So those thrusts look like they're going to hold. So I'm going to go ahead and start lubricating the bearing surfaces. And I'll lubricate the motor first, and then we'll get that center cap seated, and then we'll go ahead and lube all the caps and get those on. When you do this, like I said, be real careful you don't get any lubrication, especially if you're using like a Molly style assembly lube. Any lubrication between the caps, because it will change your squish there on your main caps, which will change your bearing tolerance. You want those to be dry and clean. You see, you got a lot of guys using gloves, like latex gloves, when they do engine assembly. And I don't like to do that because I like to do what they call an intimate inspection, which is basically without gloves on, you can feel any little grain of anything that might be in there, any dirty spot. So when you don't have gloves on, you can feel that stuff a lot better, and you have less chance of having a foreign body in there. Especially when you're trying to assemble an engine in a machine shop where there's metal chips everywhere. I tried to clean up pretty good around here before I started this process, but there's still stuff all over the place in here. So probably not the cleanest area to assemble an engine in, but it's where all my tools are, so kind of don't really have an option. Alright, quite a bit of lube on the mains there. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this crank in. So that's in there. I'm going to move this over here. You guys might have a better view. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and snug up this cap. And then I'm going to tap the crank back and forth to make sure that center cap is centered on the block, so both thrust bearings line up with each other. I'm just going to get it barely snug. Kind of hard to tap on that end, but maybe we can get a piece of plastic or something. Alright, so I'm going to tap it this way, and then I'm going to gently tap it back this way. Hopefully the idea is that will help center up that center bearing. I'm not going to spin that yet. You don't want to spin this crank until you have all those caps seated, because the lube will come around and end up getting between the caps. So you want to get it all together first before you spin the crank. Trying to kind of eyeball this straight with the block since nothing locates on. I'm trying to work quickly so that the lube doesn't migrate down into the in between the cap. Now I'm going to send these a little bit by hand. And then I'm going to back them off one at a time and re-lubricate them and torque them. We're using the ARP lube. We'll re-lube the threads a little bit. Lube the face of the cap where the face of the nut sits. Make sure that the studs haven't backed out from taking the nuts out. They almost always loosen up, it seems, when you take the nuts back out. I'll put a little bit of lube on the face of the nuts. I don't go crazy with this stuff when I'm measuring everything because it kind of gets everywhere, and you don't really want it, you know, on your bearing surfaces and stuff because it does have solids in it. And a lot of assembly lubes do, but I don't prefer them. I like to use something that's a liquid that washes out as soon as the engine starts and replaces itself with oil, fresh oil. So I don't like having all those moly solids ending up in your oil pan forever and ever. So I'm going to continue this process of re-lubing everything, all the nuts and studs. And then we'll go through the torque sequence. Again, making sure the studs are seated. All right, I'm going to go wash my hands, come back and torque this. And torque it in sequence in 3 stages. I'm just going to go back through one more time, make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. Okay, so before I rotate this thing, I'm going to drip a little bit of assembly lube on the thrust bearing just to help kind of lubricate that as it spins, since we didn't really lubricate the face of it. I probably should have. And we'll be real gentle with it and kind of work it down in there. Move around there now. So, and that's what a crank should feel like right there. Very little resistance. So I know that the block's straight, the line bore in the block is true. I mean, that feels really, really good. So if you have load on the crank, something's not right. Some engines are really tight, like some of the BMW engines and stuff. I haven't worked on them personally, but I've heard that they're pretty snug from the factory because they have really, really small tolerances. But on something like this, where we're over 2 thou tolerance on the oil clearance on the mains, It shouldn't have hardly any resistance. I mean, that's really good. So I'm happy with that. I think that it's time to flip this motor over and start prepping to put some pistons in it. So as far as measuring the bores on the pistons, or on the rod pins and bores, same deal as measuring the mains. You know, measure your bearing clearance. I like to use, like I said, the telescoping gauges. Measure it with the bearing torque down in the cap, and then measure the crank, and you'll know the difference between the two is your oil clearance. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be money because I already measured the bores of the rods and the crank, and I did the math for the bearings, so it should be perfect. But I'm going to go ahead and double check it anyway. Now I have measured all of the main journals, or all of the rod journals on the crank, and I have measured all of the rods, and I know they're all the same. I'm pretty confident that if I check one of these with the bearing in it, that they're all going to be exactly the same. So go ahead and do that. Make sure you know which way that cap goes on. Typically your little tangs for your bearings are located on the same side, and these ones are, so. But make sure you note that before you take that cap off. If you get it backwards, your bearing bore could be screwed up. So. Again, making sure there's nothing between the cap. Assembly lube on the rod bolts. A little bit under the head of the bolt where it interfaces the surface. I'm going to go ahead and put a little on this surface too. Sorry, you guys can't even see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go grab these in a vise and torque them down to spec. Okay, so I'm over here at my vise. I've got a piece of foam to protect the rod and to keep the piston off of any dirty surfaces. These rods didn't come with a torque spec, but they are an ARP bolt with that's 3/8 diameter and a 7/16 head. So I went to Eagle Rods' site, and I found that they recommend 43 foot-pounds. So I'm going to do that in 2 stages. I'm going to go 20 and then 43. Okay, so now I'm going to check the bearing bore diameter versus the crank journal diameter. So we have 1.8835. And on the journal, we have 1.8015. So basically right at 2 thou clearance, so that's perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and take these all apart and lube everything up and get ready to drop some pistons in here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is wipe down these cylinders with a little bit of engine oil. Just to lubricate them a little bit, help them clean the surface. This, again, I'm using the Brad Penn break-in oil for assembly and for break-in of the engine. I'm also going to lubricate my little piston ring compressor here. A lot of you guys will probably be using like a standard adjustable piston ring compressor, but these guys are awesome. This is just it's basically made to your bore. So this is an 83 millimeter bore engine, so that's an 83 millimeter bore piston ring compressor, and it has a taper in here that helps it basically seat those rings down into the bore. So just wipe that down with a little bit of oil. Then of course we need to lubricate the bearings. Again, take care to make sure nothing's in between the surfaces there. Okay, so these oil retaining rings in these pistons have proven to be quite a pain on these Molly pistons, and they keep popping out of the groove, so I'm going to have to be really careful when I put them down into the piston ring compressor, that they're not binded funny or not seated properly. Yeah, they're really a pain. These are the worst ones I've ever dealt with. It's like they're too big, but I know they're not. I'm just making sure my rings are rotated correctly. That looks pretty good. So, I'm going to stick these down in here, like so. And carefully push them down. They sure feel like they're going in just right. So you want to make sure nothing feels like it's binding or keeping it from going in. But basically that's that. And then you want to make sure your orientation's correct, depending on your valve pockets and the way your pistons are facing. These ones have the single valve pocket for that fifth valve, and they also have a cutout under the skirt for the oil squirter. So it's pretty hard to screw up as long as you make note of which one's the intake versus exhaust side of the engine. So you want to hold this firm down against the surface, even if it was a normal spring compressor. I think that feels pretty good. It didn't go. Nope, something's locking it up. So I'm going to pull it back out and double check. Looks like that oil ring. What would make these even better is if they had a little lip on them that would center them in the bore. But I'm sure some pistons wouldn't be able to go in if you did that. So, try that again. And we're just going to send it, see if it goes. That felt pretty good. Now we're going to flip this over and make sure it's lining up on the crank. Hey, look at that. It's perfect. So what I should have done, I should have had this crank face the opposite direction. So now I'm going to have to be really careful to make sure there's no lube between the caps. Actually looks like my oil squirter might be hitting the skirt a little bit, and it's not even seated yet, so that's a little concerning. I might have to pull these back out and actually bend those out of the way a little bit. because it's still got a ways to go, and it's definitely hitting that squirter. So, another problem. Got to work through them, right? Yeah, it's definitely hanging up on that squirter. That sucks. Oh well, out she comes. So, it looks as though I need to bend these squirters a little bit. I could probably just let the pistons do it, but that's probably not a good practice. Could break one off or something. I had to figure out how to go about doing that without denting up the cylinders or something. Looks like maybe I could kind of wedge something between the cap and I guess the journal and the block and maybe the squirter and maybe gently bend those over a little bit. Let's see. Okay, so they bent pretty easy, but as I bent them, they kind of pointed the wrong direction. So I found this little piece of tubing to kind of aim them where I wanted them again. I'm going to try plopping the piston back in here because now it looks like they might try to hit the rod. So this might be a little funky. Maybe this is a common problem on the stroker engines, I don't know. There we go. Might just work. I'm going to go ahead and put the cap on this one and rotate the engine around and make sure everything is clearing. And then if so, I'll go ahead and do the same with the rest of them. And 20 and 43. Looks like everything clears. So yeah, that should work. Deck height looks perfect. I like that. Alright, so I'm going to continue bending those and continue installing these pistons, and we should be good to go. That'll button up the bottom end. The nice thing about these is you can really feel if those rings aren't in the right spot because it'll bind on the way in, and it makes it very, I guess, safer to use than the little clamp-on ones, because once you clamp those on, you don't know if something's not right. Well, there it is, guys. Apparently my camera died right there at the end of the assembly process, but you got the point. It's all buttoned up. Everything moves freely. Deck height looks good. Very little play in the rods. You know, that's about it for this. Just need to start, finish up the assembly with bolting on the oil pump and the front and rear covers, and obviously oil pan and all that stuff. But the main assembly of the block, the hard part, is done. So next videos I'll probably move on to doing the cylinder head. I'm going to tear down a cylinder head, port and polish it, gasket match it, and then reassemble, doing a valve lapping and things like that. But besides that, this part's ready to go. I'm going to wrap it up and on to the next thing. If you guys are liking, following along, please subscribe. Trying to, I guess, just kind of put information out there. Some of you have mentioned that I need to smile more or something like that. To be completely honest, life's been pretty rough lately, as life is, and I've been going through some stuff. Our family has, and these video logs or vlogs or whatever are kind of a way to help me try to kind of get out of my funk a little bit. So been having a little bit of trouble getting motivated, a little bit of trouble concentrating on work, things like that. So these videos have kind of forced me to kind of get back into the swing of things and keep moving forward even though life is rough. So I will try to have a better attitude. I'll try to smile more and all that stuff, but just wanted to let you guys understand kind of where I'm coming from, why I seem real serious lately and stuff like that. But anyway, moving forward, cylinder head's next. So that's it for now. Take care.